Okay. That's the question about the blanket. I keep telling us all about the blanket. Why is it so great? That's what. well, well, because I mean, I'll tell you what. Maybe it's not so great for everybody, but what I've found is that it's more helpful than I expect it to be. Like, if I'm getting some soreness in the joints, especially knees, I wouldn't imagine that having a warm blanket over them would really help very much. And it helps more than I would expect. That's one thing. Another thing is it can get quite tough, this being on one's own. I mean, yes, not on one's own, but kind of on one's own, being with oneself. It's not always so easy. And it is along with whatever else it is, this is also a path of coming to terms with ourselves. And that's not so easy. And any little scraps of comfort that can just kind of reassure us that this is an okay thing to do, I don't know. There's some, I think it's Master Sheng Yen, I think it was, or there's some, I think it's his tradition, the Western Chan Fellowship. Oh, I hope I got that right. Forgive me, WCFers, if I'm wrong, but who I think always use a blanket. They just wouldn't do it without. Yeah. But I'd be very open to hearing other points of view on the blanket, the Dharma blanket. Let's see, any others in the room here? Well, if anything comes up, just let me know. Okay, so here's one from Angela. I've been working today in the UK, and a work issue has come up which is distracting me in my sitting. My sitting is quite deep, but I find this issue, which will have to be addressed in the next few days, keeps coming up. How do I deal with this skillfully? I would imagine that, even people who aren't going to work might have something equivalent, all the more so if every time you sit, you're just fresh from the daily accumulations, of images, conversations, feelings, that it all get absorbed, and then we sit and somehow sitting is a way of releasing, yes, but over time it's easier. And so if you're getting refilled every day, it's harder, especially if you've got some issue that's kind of tricky, which I assume this would be. I imagine, just at a rough guess, it might be some interpersonal thing that's difficult. I don't know, maybe it's not, but that's often what vexes us most. And it will come up because some of the views today are that basically our big brains evolved for exactly that purpose, to process interpersonal, interactive matters that, the bigger hominin brain kind of swelled, you could almost say, as band size grew, and band size and navigating the band became a critical matter for well-being and flourishing and reproducing. And this is a view that you can find, in theory of neuroscience and evolution, human evolution, that therefore the thicker neofrontal cortex and generally the larger cranium capacity for the brain is there to help us run simulations of interactions, past interactions we've had, future interactions we might have, and to navigate the band better. So you're really, in a way it's cutting to the heart of it, this question. But I like the way it's put. How do I deal? Well, we'll look at how the question is put. How do I deal with it skillfully? Okay, so a little bit counterintuitive here. The first thing I would put a question mark around is deal with it. that's already said quite unmistakably, I think, that it's a problem. That having this repetitive set of thoughts, perhaps internal speech and internal image, I'm guessing, likely, and presumably some internal emotion, sensation, around about here, in this kind of zone, this zone, activated somewhere in here, along with the thought, along with the feeling, along with the images and the talk in the mind. I mean, hopefully I'm not too far off, but if I can work on that track, where, we're saying, having these phenomena arise in my experience, namely certain kinds of speech in the mind, certain kind of image in the mind, one or the other or both very likely, and having certain sensations arise in this area. That's something to be dealt with. So it's a good word, this word skillfully. It's the right word. I mean, just to be really a bit radical, what about if we don't start from the premise that it's a problem? Because that premise is saying, I know how meditation should be, or at the very least, I know how it should not be. I know that what's going on now is not what we want to have happening in meditation. Well, it's very understandable that we would feel that way and think that way, because we're talking about essentially an unpleasant experience in the moment, right? Difficult emotions are unpleasant. Perseverative thinking is kind of unpleasant when we can't stop thinking about something with accompanying feeling. It's unpleasant. So it's quite reasonable that we would want it to stop. But what if, this is a crazy path, which says sort of, we'll get what we want the opposite way. We'll get what we want by no longer wanting it. So one way to look at this, there's probably dozens of ways we could approach it, because it is really, in a sense, you've touched on the essential process of meditative growth. I mean, this is exactly, in a sense, what it's for. Because you again, I'm taking some assumptions here. If I haven't gone way off track with what you're actually experiencing, hoping I haven't gone way off track, what you're describing is dukkha, suffering. There's something going on in life. It's against what I wish for. There are uncomfortable experiences associated with it when I'm on the cushion, or which probably would be there even if I wasn't on the cushion, but it's clearer when I'm on the cushion. Good. We want it to be clearer, because then we can start working on it. Not as a problem, but as a growth opportunity. So maybe I shouldn't say working on it. Maybe that's not the right thing to say. We can start letting it teach us. Maybe a better thing to say. One way is to use the frame of the hindrances. First hindrance is desire, the second is aversion. Probably we've nailed it. I'm guessing it's aversion. I don't like these feelings I'm having and these thoughts I'm having. So here's just one way, okay, is to kind of tune, in a way, sort of take the emphasis off the content, the particular situation, and see if we can steer it more onto the actual aversion itself, the not liking, this experience, the wanting it to be gone, the wanting this moment to have something else in it, or to not have this in it. Can you just maybe start to get a little sense that that is present? This thing, this experience called aversion is present. So it's just sort of trying to kind of, move away from the content, the scenario, and just come to the not liking it. There's a famous line in Zen, when like and dislike disappear, the way is clear. So this is exactly desire and aversion. Zen in some ways simplified the whole thing. So it just got down to these two basic things, like and dislike, desire and aversion in the old form, where they were 2 of 5, but leaving that aside. So here we are, scenario, problematic, I'm sitting, can't stop thinking about it, yucky feelings about it. I don't want the sitting to be like this. I don't want to be invaded by this intrusive thing from my life. It's not what sitting is for. They're talking, Valerie and Henry are talking about vast cosmic, all is one, and here I am fretting over a work problem, This is my opportunity to discover I'm the whole universe, and it's that damn person at work, filling my mind and heart, Okay, so yes, you're right. I mean, it is actually a great opportunity, but you don't actually have to be doing a retreat for this great discovery of a lifetime to show itself. You can do it right in the middle of the most difficult, knotty emotions and entangled, complicated, interpersonal situations. It's always present. So just put that business aside, because it's always here, and we never know when it's going to show itself. And it doesn't prefer nice times. Truly. I mean, for real. I mean, I heard one guy talking not long ago in a Q&A with another teacher who he'd had a very, very difficult loss, a grievous loss. And he was talking about it. This had happened to him, I think, a year before or something. And in the aftermath of this grievous loss, he'd been trying to kind of manage his grief and, sort of live with it and somehow cope with it, deal with it. And suddenly, somehow, he was a meditator, but he wasn't sitting much. It was too awful to sit. And somehow, he became still with his tremendous loss and tremendous grief. And he described it as falling infinitely, falling into a vastness, and finding a great, great peace, which didn't deny the greatness of his loss. And actually the teacher, hearing this story, gave their comment on it. It sort of surprised me, but I thought it was right on. They said, so you found real, true equanimity. You found the real meaning, the truest, deepest kind of equanimity. See, equanimity is such a sort of anodyne word. It's sort of it sounds like it's balanced. It's just being balanced. I mean, nothing wrong with that, but it's not very exciting, really, is it? It doesn't sound like there's much discovery in it. But actually, what is the source? If there is such a thing as an unshakable equanimity, if there is such a thing, and I can't answer that, but if there is, how could it exist? What would make it possible? If not a very profound release, of all we normally hold. So, you see what I mean? Am I making this clear? Like, I mean, maybe this is like a sledgehammer for a nut when it's a work problem that you could, maybe use some skillful mindfulness with. But the bigger picture is that there really is a bigger picture. That's the most important thing. There truly is a very much bigger picture. It's for real. It's not just a tool to help us. It's reality, a vastly bigger picture. And that's why this practice exists. At the same time, that's not the only way of dealing with niggling work problems coming up during sitting. We can also, go to the hindrances. Which one is it? It's aversion. Let me find the aversion in my body. In Zen terms, let me find the preference in my body. There's a preference. I wish the situation was different, and I wish the situation wasn't polluting my glorious sitting, So that's two preferences, so to speak. So but preference is one system. So find the preference system. It's like a little choosing thing here. Just find it. It's sort of round about here. Yes, no, yes, no. I like, I hate, I like, I hate. Find it. It operates. So and see what it's like if you can actually locate choosing, preferring, preferring, aversion, desiring, craving. If you can actually locate it as a physical experience in your body, wow, it's kind of interesting actually. Look at that thing doing its thing. It's really quite interesting. And the moment it's interesting, somehow its horrid hold is broken. Stops being a nasty, yucky. Just becomes interesting. Okay, so that's a possibility. Whew. Okay, question from Leah. Isn't wonder, awe, and joy appropriate responses to a koan? Well, I would love to agree with you. Yeah. And I'm very happy. I'm assuming that if you're asking this question, you're finding them. So happy to hear the question being asked. Wonder, awe, and joy. Yeah, because again, in a sense, it's not exactly to the koan. It's to what the koan can show us. The koan is this sneaky little, I think of them like nanobots. That, you swallow them like bio nanobots. You swallow them and they go and do stuff to you. You don't even know they're going to do. And boom, all of a sudden, something you thought you could stand on is gone. And instead of it being a horror, it's a wonder, it's awe, it's a joy, it's a relief. Yeah, nice. Okay. Please explain the Samba tradition and how it differs from Rinzai and Soto practice. Thank you. Okay, in a nutshell, there were some Soto masters in the mid-20th century, in the early 20th century, who thought that their school, or I don't know, their particular sub-schools or something, weren't really somehow paying enough attention to awakening, Kensho. And there's one guy in particular, Dayan Harada Roshi, who he realized he'd been sitting 20 years. He was even a master, and he was afraid of dying, afraid of various things. And he thought, well, this can't be right. So he wrote to 3 masters asking them, can you help me with fear of death? And one of the 2 wrote back in some certain sort of ways and rather complicated. And one wrote back very simply, said, just have Kensho. It'll clear it up. So he went and studied with that one. And he did have Kensho. He was walking down a country lane. And according to the story, he saw an old woman, this is in the country, peeing into a puddle. somehow sort of came around a bend and that was happening. And the froth on the water of the puddle. That was it. Suddenly there was nothing but that froth. Nothing but that froth. That froth, the whole universe. And that's what he was. Boom. Whole problem of life and death cleaned up. So he then kind of combined, I'm sorry I didn't say this, he was Soto by origin, and that master was Rinzai, so he kind of combined Rinzai and Soto. So we're a combination. We do some of the shikantaza practice, the just sitting practice, which is more associated with Soto, and we sort of revere Dogen and study him to some extent. And we also do koans, which are more associated with the Rinzai lineage. And we're kind of lay, we're pretty much a lay practice group, which has spawned a lot of other groups, in the West. There's quite a lot of, it's a tiny little thing, but it's had a great influence. It's got quite a lot of, even today, still has quite a lot of members, actually. The Zendo in Kamakura, where it all comes from, is, I think it's smaller than this. It's similar, maybe, similar size. They used to somehow cram 60 or 55 people into it, and then 25 more into a kind of upstairs room that they built to accommodate them. They could get 80. And you look at it, it doesn't seem humanly possible, but they apparently did. Nearly everybody's sleeping in there as well. Or maybe not sleeping. Trying to sleep. Okay, here we go. Can you say more about the fourth? This is Amy. So that was Mark. Amy, can you say more about the fourth dimension, suffering that brings insight and growth, and God's will, God being a stand-in for Buddha nature, or that which is beyond intellectual comprehension? Yeah, that's a lovely question. I feel where that question's coming from. Can you say more about the fourth dimension, suffering that brings insight and growth, and God's will or Buddha nature, that which is beyond comprehension? In a way, I think maybe it ties into what I was saying about becoming empty of knowing this morning. Not knowing. How can I put this? One hallmark of, I think, of a deeper realization is a sense that we've been very wrong. It's a nice thing. We realize, oh my God, nothing is really the way I thought. I've had it all wrong. I've had it all back to front. But actually, so fine, there's that, the knowing we had has been wrong. We realize it, But in our forgetting awakening, in our ordinary practice, letting go of knowing, it's another way of expressing the release of preference, possibly. Because if we decide, or if we're ready to not know what's good, what's bad, don't take this the wrong way, not in terms of precepts and ethical and moral principles, but in terms of our own judging, our own war with the moment. As Samba, the nun, was saying, if we stop thinking that we know, if we stop trusting our own knowing, our own assessing, our own judging, which is all based on assumption that we know how things should be. if we release that, well, we would just see how things then look, Henry, can you speak to working with moo off the cushion and in everyday life? Thank you, from Mary. I'd say if you're sort of getting deep into moo and you're really kind of into it, it may just start to come up when you're riding your bike or driving your car or walking down the street or cruising the supermarket aisles. It may just suddenly pop up. Great. Go with it. Just do some mooing in your mind. Or you can more deliberately do that. You go for a walk with moo. You could, but I wouldn't want to force that on anybody. I think it's, when you're ripe for sort of doing it more, when you're curious about it and really kind of interested in it, and you're feeling stuff unexpected about it, and so, whoa, that's a bit weird. I didn't know that. It must be something to do with moo, But that, when it's sort of it's infusing your life in interesting ways, let's say, then yeah, you would just pick it up whenever you want to. I don't know if I can say much more than that. I mean, I suppose if you were wanting to make it more deliberate, you could link it to things like walking through doorways or getting in and out of chairs or going through, little points in the day that will happen. If you're reaching for the fridge, do a few moves before you open it, or opening a closet, or reaching for crockery or a plate, dinnerware, just a couple of moves. When you're eating, moo before every mouthful. I don't know. You can weave it in more deliberately like that. Yeah, if you want. Okay, occasionally I experience in meditation a dropping away of everything. I have no awareness of self, as if sleeping, but I know this is not the case. I only become aware when I come out of it and realize I was, quote, gone. Is this a form of samadhi and advantageous, or something that should be avoided, as I seem not to be present? I mean, this is a great one. I mean, probably, this is Sylvia, probably, I don't know, but it does sound like a form of samadhi. I mean, as if you're not nodding off, and you must be the judge of that, Sylvia. Assuming you're not nodding off, then yes, there is a flavor of samadhi which is very, very quiet and sort of empty. And we can go into it, and there's perfect clarity, but the bell rings, and there's just this, like a sort of dark water of a clear lake, and then bing, it's ringing again. What happened? Seemed like a minute went by, but we weren't lost in thought. That is a form of samadhi. So maybe you're tasting that, because you say, I seem not to be present. So yeah, is it possible for there to be presence without I? Deep, clear presence without I. Is that possible? Is I necessary for presence? Is I necessary for life? That's the matter at hand. Another one, Mark. I recall that Linus of the Peanuts tradition also appreciated his blanket. Yes, indeed. A lot of wisdom, I think, in that cartoon, right? Have you experienced your head feeling gigantic, floating like a balloon, or that you are behind/wider than your body? Patrick. Yes. Yeah, these are good. These are markers of samadhi coming on. Strange body sensations like that, like growing very big. Sort of hands feel like they're giant boxing gloves, and and you suddenly feel terribly tall or terribly inflated or something. All of that, I think, I kind of think it's good. It's often quite pleasant, and it definitely means samadhi. Yeah. Oh, great! There's affirmation here. This is from Angela. I was right on with the work issue. Really grateful for you. Okay, great. Happy to hear it. Okay, there seem to be everyday koans that are much more effective in everyday life than any in the Mumonkan or the other collections. Wouldn't the first question today be such a one? Okay, wait, what was the first question today? I'm whizzing back. Kinda. I wouldn't call that a koan. No, I wouldn't really call that a koan. Sorry. In some kind of way, everything's a koan. It's kind of true. But just wrestling with an issue, I mean, people often say that that's my koan. It's become common parlance almost. But it's the purpose of a koan is, it's quite specific. It's a little, sometimes they're known as, what do they call them? Wedges, that you sort of knock in with a mallet. They're little wedges that actually got one job to do, which is sort of dismantle our sense of self. Sort of send a shockwave through our sense of things altogether, such that, the world as we know it crumbles to dust. As Yamada Koen Roshi put it, heaven and earth collapsed and were reduced to dust, he said. That's the intention of a koan. So yes, if you're approaching, a life tangle in that kind of way, then you could possibly call it a koan. But that's, I think, not what people usually mean when they say they got a life koan. Maybe I'm wrong. This is Deborah. This mini monastic week for us in daily life of mostly worldly concerns and with few years left. If Zen monks spend decades living in sesshin, how are we to realistically awaken? Well, we are a lay line. Our current international abbot is a very busy businessman. His dad, who was actually Yamada Koen back in the abbot in the 60s, in the 70s and 80s, he ran a hospital. He didn't even start sitting till he was maybe in his 40s or 30s or something. He was, and when he was still very busy, he used to go to a monastery in Kamakura where they lived for a morning sit at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. or something. 5 a.m. probably. Walk to the train station, get the train to Tokyo, go to his work, come back at the end of a long day on the train, stop off at the same monastery, do his sit, then go home. And it worked. It worked. Now, on the other hand, none of us know how many years we've got left. Okay, we all know that. Does that mean don't bother about awakening? Actually, I think don't bother about awakening, full stop, no matter how old you are. Don't bother. Just put it away. I'm sorry, I'm almost ashamed to have been talking about it, but I got asked all these questions about it. We shouldn't think about it. Sorry. That's the hazard of koans, that it gets people thinking about a goal. It's terrible. It really is. It's absolutely wrong. I told you at the beginning of this retreat, there's only one goal, and it's not a goal. It's just a gentle returning to now. That's all we need to do. That's all that we need do. Anything else is basically a lie. Just throw it away. It's nonsense. But this is somehow not nonsense. This. Still, that's still why I think the best first koan is this. What is this? Or simply, this. And by the way, don't bother with a koan if you think about it. It's not for thinking about. It's only any use if it helps with this, with being here, with your very being. Really your own sort of innermost being ready to open to just this. There's really nothing more. So letting your innermost self, your innermost, receive this life, which is now. That's it. Here's a comment. Not a question, but Delphine and I loved Kamakura on our honeymoon trip. Japan. Interesting linkage. Yes, nice. Someone said, being loves to be. Yeah, I agree. Oh, I totally agree. There's a longer one here that, okay, I'll just see if I can help. Teachers of direct methods in Sam Harris, Waking Up, etc., Locke Kelly, Stephen Bodian, suggest habituating these glimpses and take their courses, webinars, high-priced, Year to Awakening program. Is this American selling shortcuts, even in the promising forum of waking up? Look, what I would say, I don't want to disparage anybody, so I'm not going to for a second, but I would say that actually the kind of pointing out practices that they're talking about and offering, I think is reasonable. I think it's quite possible to have glimpses of this sort of a bigger awareness, this more inclusive awareness. I think you can sort of get that in a 1-hour session with a very skillful teacher. It's not the same thing as Kensho. It could be, and it's definitely the same kind of territory, but by and large, the little glimpse practices, they give you the bona fide hit at something very wonderful. It's just that it's not the same as Kensho. Kensho is a radical turning point in a life. I'm not saying those couldn't be either, they could. But so another, I'm just trying to say that there are, again, I believe sort of different depths of awakening, different levels of awakening. And it's fairly easy to parse them out, actually. And catching a glimpse of belonging to a bigger awareness, becoming aware of your own awareness being much bigger than you thought, it's great, just great. And it's reasonable, I think, I don't think you can promise, but I think you can say there's a reasonable chance you'll get some hits of this if you do my course. I don't think that's unreasonable. And so I think it's fair enough. And on the other hand, you could say on the Zen way is downright terrible. They say, we can't promise you anything except that your knees will hurt for many years, you know. I mean, why bother, you know? You know, and so, no, I mean, I think it's, you know, there's pros and cons wherever you go. Pitfalls and possibilities in every form of practice. I'll tell you what I think as well, is that we are in the beginning of a fantastic evolution, where all these different forms of spiritual practice are meeting one another, being stirred together quite rightly, because they've all got blind spots. Each of them has blind spots. So you get a few together, fewer blind spots, probably, you know, mixing in with modern psychotherapy, fuller picture of the human being, you know, so as if you don't, the solution to a entrenched grief shock isn't go to a monastery. That's the only solution. It's no longer that. There's other ways of approaching it. Our understanding of human suffering is being beautifully infused with Buddhism, which is a great expert on human suffering, and with the findings of psychology, and even more so now with modern neuroscience. We're in an amazing time. And I would love to be around 100 years from now and see how the Dharma has stewed itself into an incredible new westernized form, which it's going to do. It's already doing it. And it'll be in some ways better. Well, no, it can't be better. But it'll be easier. This thing, you know, we've been in the time of pioneers. These poor people who went off Japan and burnt out their knees for decades. That's not the only way to do it. You know, it's like the early days of mountain climbing. One Zen student of mine in Switzerland, actually, Hans Beat, I remember having a conversation with him. Yeah, you know, when they climbed mountains, there used to be heavy leather boots and furs, and it all weighed so much, and the ropes snapped, and they got frostbite. The gloves weren't good enough, you know, and you know, only 5 would try the big peaks. And today, you know, you can have much lighter gear. It's kind of easier, and hundreds of people do Everest, and you know, that's his own chronicles. But you know, it's like that. It's going to get. We're coming out of the pioneer days into the time when actually this form is not the only way of doing it. The idea that you've got to go and do punishing retreats 5-10 times a year, or you won't awaken. Rubbish, not true. You know, and some people are saying it's actually better to have little hits every day or once a week in your ordinary life. That lay practice can be stronger and deeper. Again, it depends on the form of practice. There's some that you couldn't do in that form, but there's plenty that are plenty helpful that you can. So we're in an amazing time of growth, of spectacular growth of the Dharma, finding its way into the mainstream. I mean, how staggering that there's, 10 million people right now interested in awakening. I mean, that's amazing. Go back 60 years and, you know, there's a few beats, basically, you know. And then you had the whole mindfulness movement that kind of brought meditation down to the therapeutic side, and that's great that it did that. And now we kind of seem to be moving out of that again into the awakening business. Once again, spreading. You know, we got therapeutic, sitting, and awakening. You can't beat it. You know, it's fantastic. That's why we're so lucky at Mountain Cloud. We've got this new program, Original Love, which actually sort of covers a broader base. I think it's a perfect introductory program for meditators. You learn more of the breadth of the field. So if you then decide you want to come in, waste your life on koans, you're doing it in a more well-advised way, well-informed way. Okay, enough. Thank you so much for the questions and all the non-questioners. Thank you for listening. Thank you everybody for being here. It's fabulous to be practicing with you. Okay, I think we're probably going to get some lovely, a little break, then movement from Luke, I think is the form, and then more sitting. Thank you. And any questions I didn't get to, we'll try to address tomorrow. Okay, it's lovely to sort of get glimpses of you when I glance at the computer, but just to know that you're all there with us right here. Okay, thank you.